What's up, everybody? Thanks as always for supporting the show. It would mean a lot to me if you would take a second to scroll down and hit that subscribe button to the Hoops Tonight YouTube channel, and then follow me on social media on TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter so you guys don't miss any of our content over the course of this season. All right, let's talk some basketball. So the Warriors seem to be taking shape, right? We know what their front line looks like. It's Wiggins, Kuminga, and Draymond, although Steve Kerr inexplicably at the end of the Jazz game last night played a three-guard lineup as they got absolutely murdered on the offensive glass and nearly blew that game. But for the most part, it's been Wiggins, Kuminga, and Draymond in the front line. You know, obviously the backcourt, it seems to be, obviously Podziemski's going to start, but they can kind of go with Klay or Podziemski based on, you know, the matchup or whether or not Klay's got to go in the way that he did last night. So we kind of have a general feel of what the team looks like. We know Chris Paul is going to come back and add some more stability to the bench units, basically hopping into the Lester Quinones minutes is what I'm expecting. But there's been some good and bad. They've won 8 out of 10. Their starting lineup has been very, very good, but they've just had an absolute nightmare of a time, particularly in the fourth quarter, particularly when games are close. And so I guess let's just, now that we've seen, it's weird with the Warriors because all these other teams we kind of knew more about way earlier in the season. And like we're almost evaluating the Warriors from the perspective of like where we would normally evaluate a team at the end of November. Because we're just like, okay, we got like a good 15 game sample size of like this group of guys playing a certain brand of basketball. And so I guess let's zoom out for a second. How do we feel about the Warriors? Do you view them as like a traditional contender or just a really good playoff team or something less than that? Where are you at with the Warriors, Logan?
Right outside of real contender status, I can't imagine a world where the Golden State Warriors win the NBA Finals. It's really hard for me to imagine. This last stretch has been very, very encouraging for the Warriors. Like, they are undersized, but they're a super switchable, versatile lineup. This is the most athletic they've been in a minute. I've really liked the Dubs in transition, just the way they get up and down the floor with ease. Like, you know, Draymond starting the break. Draymond is so great at just getting the ball out immediately. And they've got other athletes, like if it's Wiggins connecting it to Kuminga, who's finishing, the fast break, whoever it is, like they move really well up and down the floor. They're fast, they're athletic. And on offense, I mean, they really spread defenses out. You know, I think that's been a big key for me is without Looney out there, you know, you don't have Draymond's also been hitting threes at an insane rate too, which I don't know if we can expect to keep up. You know, that's a big part of it too.
He's been doing it all season.
True. I'm crossing my fingers. Dre has been insane. And so that's a big component is they are really spreading and stretching defenses out. It's really an optimized offense for virtually every lineup without Looney at the 5. You know, if it's Dre at the 5, if it's Saric, if it's TJD, all of those guys are high IQ, good decision makers who can stretch the floor. And I mean, you see it with a lot of the double screens at the top of the key. And the Warriors run so many different actions out of that. I love it where, you know, if it's Kuminga on a backdoor cut, if it's Klay relocating, they just run so many actions out of that it's really hard. It keeps the defense on its heels because of how many different things they can do out of those sets. The one thing that scares me about the Dubs, and it's really similar to Boston, actually, three-point shooting is still going to be the biggest variance and the biggest swing factor for the Dubs. You know, this is still a very perimeter-oriented team, and that's the thing that scares me the most about Golden State is the volatility of the three-point shot. 40% of their shots are coming from three this season. That's the 5th highest percentage in the league. And just 27% of their shots come at the rim. That's the lowest percentage in the league. They just don't exert a ton of pressure on the rim. So what does that mean? That means that Dre is going to have a great shooting run. Wiggins is going to have a great shooting run. Klay is going to have to swing series. And on top of that, Kuminga is going to have to play like a legit number 2 when those guys aren't at their best offensively. Like, I really like what Golden State's done. But just considering those factors, the fact that I think all of those guys are going to have to reach a different level offensively and are going to have to shoot the lights out, the fact that in a lot of these matchups, I think they're at a huge, massive athletic and physical disadvantage. Jason, you talk about the game the other night where they're getting out-rebounded down the stretch. That scares me in any series against any team out west. You know, are the Dubs going to be able to hang on the glass? It seems like for me that a lot more needs to go right than to go wrong. And it scares me that in a rock fight, in one of these grimy games, Golden State just goes cold from the 3-point line and their offense completely disappears. You know what I mean? They don't have these, like Carson, like you were saying with Kristaps in Boston, they don't have a guy that can really break up these. It's Kuminga at this point. And that's just a lot of pressure to put on a young guy's shoulders like that to me, where I think everybody's going to have to play beyond their means. You need Kuminga to play like a star. Yeah, they're just at major physical disadvantages, and I think they're at a little overly reliant on the 3-point shot. I love the Warriors. I'm going to be honest, guys. I've loved watching the Warriors play. They're one of my favorite teams to ever watch in basketball history, and I enjoy watching them on a night-to-night basis. It's going to break my heart if they get knocked out in the playoffs, man, because it's going to kind of feel like the end of an era. But there's really no world in which I see Golden State hoisting the trophy at the end of this, man. There's just too many factors that I think they're going to need to go right in the playoffs.
I agree, but I do think that they are really good. I think that they are a scary first-round draw in the playoffs now in a way that they weren't a month ago, and I think that they are clearly now tapping into their ceiling as a basketball team. I think that they are unlocking that athleticism on the perimeter. I just don't think that Looney was playing at a level this year where you could justify giving him 20-something minutes a game, starting him like you did in last year's playoff run, when obviously he was awesome, especially on the glass, but now the spacing is so much better, as Logan mentioned, and that offensive congestion, having the sort of too big approach to just obvious non-shooters with how Draymond was shooting the ball last year, really shrunk the floor for them. And I do still wonder in a playoff setting, there's no question that it's a better situation now and really everybody on the floor can handle and everybody can knock down an open jumper. I still worry if Draymond sustains this level, if Kuminga sustains the necessary level as a 3-point shooter. Wiggins obviously has been super volatile this year. Like, those are guys who in the regular season you respect as floor spacers. In a playoff chess match, I worry a little bit about having a few guys who, can knock down those shots, but consistently aren't necessarily great 3-point shooters. But overall, I just think it's so much better basketball offensively. Draymond does unlock so much with his playmaking. Logan, you mentioned pushing the tempo. Pods has been awesome there too. What Draymond does facilitating those split actions, like, it's just really pretty basketball. They look like the Warriors right now. They're doing their stuff. And when Draymond comes back, he changes a whole bunch of those dynamics. Not only does he allow them to play these sort of small ball looks because he's such a freak defensively, he really does do so much to unlock everything that this team can do in terms of the creativity away from the ball. And they've just been way better when he's on the floor. When he plays, they outscore opposing teams by 6 points per 100 possessions. They're legitimately a really good basketball team. And we're seeing that right now, particularly with the small ball lineup that has pods in there. With Klay, Curry, Wiggs, Kuminga, and Dre, they've still been good. But when you put pods in there instead of Klay, that is a plus 26 net rating. Not a huge sample size, but we've seen them legitimately run that lineup with good volume over this last 10 plus game stretch with Dre at the 5, and they're just killing people. So I think that if you are looking at a matchup against, say, the Clippers, as we saw a couple days ago, they easily could have won that game, or the Suns, who they did beat, like these teams who don't have these overwhelming, super physical, big front lines, then I think this team can run and gun. And I think that they can hold up defensively in those matchups. And I think that they give themselves the best shot at an upset. Where I get concerned about it, the reason I can't say that I could see them winning the title is that means you have to find a way to beat the Denver Nuggets. And the Denver Nuggets are going to be way, way bigger than you, stronger than you, and still have this tremendous offensive skill, still have this unbelievable perimeter shot making, have all this continuity, have the best player on the floor. And that's a really tough mountain to climb. Against the Clippers also, I think, like, you should play small against them. That gives you your best chance. But also, they just have more of those star-level shot creators. And that's what concerns me. Logan, you mentioned the reliance on the 3. It's the Golden State Warriors. They've always been relying on the 3. They're an outlier because they have the greatest shooter of all time and the second greatest shooter of all time. Like, that's not what concerns me. What concerns me is the lack of a second guy who can really threaten defenses with the ball in his hands. They don't have obviously what Kevin Durant did, but they also don't have Jordan Poole in 2022, who was awesome in that playoff run. They don't have a Klay Thompson who was more comfortable putting the ball on the floor, like at least was a capable athlete, right? And that to me is the one thing that they had to find a way to acquire at the deadline. Kuminga, of course, brings you some of that on-ball scoring with his mismatch attacking, but it's different. And I do worry a little bit about guys in playoff settings who are so specifically reliant on athletic tools and don't necessarily have that skilled shot making. So they are playing so much better. They have found the best version of themselves. But against like the best teams in the West, it's kind of the same thing where it's like, all right, can they hang physically, and do they have that second star that all of these other teams are going to have? And I'm still not convinced on those fronts.
So I put the Warriors, based on everything I've seen in this last month or so, basically right in the same tier with all of those teams that are below Denver and the Clippers, which is, I think they're really good playoff teams that have big red flags. And you can say that about literally every team outside, like whether it's the Thunder just being kind of small and inexperienced, whether it's the Timberwolves having issues with late game offense and execution, whether it's the Suns with their lack of physicality, you know, we can go on and on down the list. They all have their issues. And so first, there's a lot of good. They've won 8 of their last 10. The Steph, Draymond, Kuminga, Wiggins lineups, regardless of who it is at the 2, are plus 16 net, 120 offensive rating. That's awesome. 104 defensive rating. That's awesome. But they have, in my opinion, 3 major issues. And these 3 issues are specifically bothering them at the end of games, although there is one of them in particular is kind of stretching into other elements of the game. So first of all, on the offensive end of the floor, they're incredibly dependent specifically on Steph's shot making at the end of games. I went back this morning, even though I watched the games live, I just wanted to just look over the film a little bit closer at all the Warriors' offensive possessions as they kind of blew things late against Utah, and then as they blew things late against the Clippers. And it's just like, it's Steph running around in circles until he can get a shot. That's literally what it is. And like, when it goes in, it looks good. And when it doesn't, they just don't really have another option. And like, here's the thing, Steph, throughout most of the season, with the exception of like these last 2 games have been a little bit on the rougher side, but like he's made a lot of those shots. But the problem is even with Steph making almost 50% of his shots, you know, well over 40% of his threes in these clutch situations, over the last 15 games, the Warriors have gone to crunch time 8 of those 15 games, and they have a 105 offensive rating. So regardless of Steph making a good amount of these shots, it's not amounting to points on a per possession basis. And like one of the things I talk about, you had mentioned rock fight. I think it was Logan who had brought that up. When you get into these rock fights, like a lot of times those jumpers do miss because guys are just tired. And that's not to say Steph won't make some of them. He's the best shooter of all time. But like, this is why, like, you know, early in the season, we were preaching like, go get a Siakam. Because like, he's a guy that can turn his back to the basket, bully his way close to the rim and try to make something happen there. And like, honestly, like, this is where I have some more, like, both of you guys are really low on the Warriors as a championship contender. And don't get me wrong, I like I said, I put them in that tier below the Nuggets and the Clippers, but I think they have as good of a chance as any of those other teams. And the main reason why is some of these problems are fixable. For instance, like, throw some variety in there at the end of the games offensively. Don't rely only on Steph. If you can find a way to give some of those possessions to Kuminga on post-ups or Wiggins on ISOs, or even just running more of your motion stuff and getting the ball in Podziemski's hand, who's done a really nice job of kind of towing that line of aggression and keeping the ball movement. Like, if you do something like that, you buy some more time for rest for Steph, where he might be able to make more of those shots. The second big piece of it is the defensive end of the floor. They have, in those 8 clutch games over the last 15, they have a 136 defensive rating.
Yeesh.
It has been a consistent issue this year, and that even extends to fourth quarters at large. Now, again, I was like, let's go look at the tape. So I was looking at the tape specifically of the Clippers game, and I think a lot of it is fixable. This is not a group that has bad defensive personnel. Draymond Green is one of the very best backline anchors that you can have for a defense in the NBA. Andrew Wiggins, Jonathan Kuminga, Gary Payton, Brandon Podziemski, that is a good core of perimeter defenders. They are capable of being a much better defense than they have been. And one of the big things that I've noticed, and this is on Steve Kerr, they have been a little bit like the old Raptors teams under Nick Nurse, where they're just overly aggressive and unnecessarily overhelping. The Norman Powell's left corner three, the one that Brandon Podziemski ran over his head and then he kind of pump faked and leaned in and shot. It was a possession where they basically, for no particular reason at all, double teamed Paul George on a pick and roll, and when they didn't really need to, and it left an easy skip pass because Podziemski had to tag the roller. There was a play where Norman Powell made a three in the right corner. This is the one where Draymond Green went flying past him and swiped over his head and missed, and Norman Powell made the three. Jonathan Kuminga was guarding Russell Westbrook in the dunker spot and was in a great position to help on James Harden's drive on Brandon Podziemski, and Draymond Green vacated the strong side corner to overhelp and gave up an open three when he was not the right person to help there, and in general should not help out of the strong side corner, especially off of basically the best spot up shooter in basketball right now. That is execution based. Steph Curry overhelped on a Russell Westbrook drive out of the right side corner. Like, it's been a consistent issue. And then, so I look at it as some fixable stuff on defense. That's just execution. And then we talked about the Steph Curry focus on the offense late in the games, which I think has kind of led to some diminishing returns. And then last but not least, they are a dog shit rebounding team. Like, it is a big problem. Now, they've been a good rebounding team for most of the season, in large part, like you mentioned, Carson, going with bigger lineups, playing more of Kevon Looney. But this is a crazy stat. First of all, let's start big picture. Steph, Draymond, Kuminga, Wiggins, that main lineup, even with as dominant as they've been, only a 69.8% defensive rebounding percentage. That's not good. Here's another crazy stat for you. In the Jazz and Clippers games, in crunch time, 7 minutes of crunch time, they gave up an offensive rebound on 87.5% of their opponent's misses in those two games. Think about how crazy that is.
Yeah.
If you were watching the Jazz game and it felt like every single time they missed, they tapped it out and got an offensive rebound, it's because they did. They finally got one stop at the end of the Clippers game. It was a James Harden step back three at the top of the key. Nobody boxed out Russell Westbrook. He got an offensive rebound. And again, if you look down the roster, if you look at Draymond Green, you look at Jonathan Kuminga, you look at Andrew Wiggins, that's a lot of athleticism and long arms. They just have to do a better job. And so, like, some of it is like you mentioned, Carson, like there are going to be certain matchups, like Denver's just bigger and more athletic than them on the front line, even with those guys. And so there's going to be some limitations in the bigger picture, but I do think some of this is fixable. There is some better offensive process. Can they match some of the firepower that other teams can bring to the table? No, but I don't think they're a 105 offensive rating clutch team either. I think there's some room for improvement there. Defensively, again, not overhelping, and then as a team doing a better job rebounding. So again, they're just like any of these other teams. Their fate depends on their ability to address their weaknesses and reach their individual ceiling. And so I do put them in that tier. I just think there are a lot of things that have to go right. Are you guys? Let's go back to you guys really quickly, Logan. What are you guys noticing in your time watching the late game offense stuff with the Warriors? Is it something that you think is fixable, or are you more concerned about it?
No, I definitely think it's fixable. And I think you make a great point of what the Warriors could be doing differently. Steph Curry has the weight of the world on his shoulders, man. He's Atlas. He is holding up this team in any scenario. You talk about him running around. Jason, I thought about that game. I think it was double OT versus the Lakers. He scores that one bucket, two games, actually, the one against the Lakers and then one against Phoenix. He literally drives on Anthony Davis, runs all the way to the hoop, dribbles back out to the right elbow, gives him a hesitation, and luckily Anthony Davis opens up the gate so Steph Curry can go in and get that layup to tie the game up, sends it to OT. Late in the game against the Suns, Bradley Beal bites on an inbounds pass and leaves Steph wide open for that deep game-winning three. He is the late game offense. I think they could do a much better job of, like you said, alleviating the pressure, giving him a breather. I mean, if anybody, and I think they have guys that they can turn to. It's like you guys said, Wiggins is not at the level he was during the run. They don't have a guy like Jordan Poole, but they have guys that they can rely on. Like if it's Kuminga being physical and just, like you said, touching the ball in the paint. It's not even about getting the shot down there. It's about creating the advantage, drawing the attention to the paint, and that'll open up everything else for the team. And I think they should lean on pods more too. Like they have personnel. I think it is about execution, but Steph's a GOAT, but I don't think he can carry them single-handedly through the playoffs in these big moments. It's just too much pressure on his shoulders. But I do think it's fixable. I think they have the personnel in place to make it happen.
It's tough. I'm honestly not super confident about this team's clutch offense specifically. And this year they have had like a comedy of errors and of mind-blowing losses. Obviously, they're 27th in fourth quarter net rating. Like it's them and the Pistons. That's who they're hanging around with. It's crazy some of the games that they've lost late this year. So it's not that things are disastrous to that extent forever, but I do think this was a bad clutch offense last year. They were 24th in clutch offensive rating. And then out of 16 playoff teams, they were 13th in clutch offensive rating. And the reality is when you have one high-level shot creator on your team, and that guy is particularly reliant on pull-up jump shots, it's tough to manufacture a good clutch offense. Like there are ways to make the most out of the attention that Steph demands, but generally it's more like structured ATO kind of stuff. You think about that Klay game winner where Steph is a super effective diversion. At the end of the day, though, you're probably not going to run a lot of actions where it's like, all right, can Steph get open away from the ball in these last 90 seconds? Or maybe he draws a second defender that opens up something for somebody else. It's like, you're going to probably mostly put the ball in Steph's hands, and the defense is going to know that, and he might have to take a tough pull-up jumper. So I'm not super optimistic about that because I really think when you don't have another guy who can threaten defenses with their shot creation, and I'm just not sure in clutch spots Kuminga is that guy, there's kind of a ceiling to what you can do.
Yeah, and again, when it comes to the Kuminga Wiggins stuff, the idea there would be you're not scoring right now anyway, running everything through Steph. Like it's it's not a Steph issue. It's just a simple matter of like Logan put it, you're Atlas, you're doing everything. And it's just specifically when you're relying on pull-up jump shooting, your legs come into the equation a lot more. Again, if we could just cut his usage down a little bit, that could go a long way towards him being more efficient. And then again, just part of the issue too is like, because they lean so much into Steph, when another guy gets an opportunity to even like look at the rim, they won't. They'll turn and look for Steph because it's like it's almost become like it's like you better get that ball back to Steph. He's our one hope here. And it's like I think in general, even though the Wiggins possessions might lead to some frustration and the Kuminga possessions might lead to some frustration, his jumper, by the way, has gone right off of the ledge after it was red hot there for a little while. Like that's one of those things where you are more unpredictable offensively. If we come out of the timeout and it's like, well, are they going to post up Kuminga? Are they going to use Steph as a screener to try to get one of these guys downhill? Or are they going to run this action for Steph? Whereas if it's like, it's going to be Steph, and it's like, okay, we're going to switch the ball screen. We'll put Anthony Davis on and we'll live with the results. Like it just becomes really predictable. All right, let's move on.
I do agree.
Go ahead.
I think that is absolutely correct. And I think that leads to marginal improvement. I'm just not sure that it solves the fundamental issue of Steph is the scariest guy on the floor by so far in all those situations.